The question isn't whether the NFL will be unpredictable this season. It always is. The question is, are you ready for what's coming? Because the 2026 NFL season isn't just another year of football. It's the beginning of something different. Dynasties are cracking. New empires are rising. Quarterbacks who are supposed to be finished are coming back with something to prove. And teams that nobody believed in just 12 months ago are knocking on the door of greatness. This isn't a preview. This is a countdown to chaos. And by the time this is over, you're going to understand exactly what's at stake, and exactly which storylines are going to define the next decade of football. So take a breath. Settle in. Because we're going deep. Let's start where every great story starts. At the very edge of uncertainty. Picture this. It's February 2026. The confetti has just fallen. Another champion has been crowned. And before the ink is even dry on the trophy, the questions start flooding in from every direction. From every locker room. Every front office. Every sports bar in America. Who's next? Who's done? Who's going to surprise us all? Those three questions have haunted every NFL offseason in history. But this year feels different. Because the landscape of professional football is shifting underneath our feet in real time. And the people who understand that shift early, they're the ones who'll be right when everyone else is wrong. So let's talk about the biggest questions entering the 2026 NFL season. And let's not waste a single second getting there. The quarterback carousel. Who actually has a future? Here's something most people don't want to admit. Quarterback is the most important position in professional sports. Not just football. All of professional sports. One player, lining up under center, controls more of a game's outcome than any single player in basketball, baseball, or hockey. We've known this forever. But what we're watching right now, right here at the start of 2026, is a complete reshuffling of who those quarterbacks actually are. And it's dramatic. Think about it this way. 5 years ago, there was a clear top tier. A group of quarterbacks who everyone agreed were the best in the world. The elite. The untouchables. You knew their names. You knew their stories. You'd watch them win, lose, come back, fall apart, and rise again. Now, the map has changed. Some of those names are gone. Some are hanging on by a thread. And new names, names that barely registered on the national radar 2 or 3 seasons ago, are suddenly the guys everyone's talking about. But here's where it gets complicated. Not every new name is a sure thing. And not every old name is finished. The 2026 season is going to prove, once and for all, which young quarterbacks are real and which ones are just flashes of potential that never fully caught fire. Let's take that apart piece by piece. The young quarterbacks who arrived over the last 2 drafts came in with enormous expectations. That's nothing new. Every highly drafted quarterback comes with expectations. But the expectations placed on this particular group were different. They weren't just expected to develop. They were expected to arrive. To be ready. To perform at a high level immediately in a league that punishes inexperience in ways that can haunt a career forever. Some of them delivered. Some of them struggled. And now, entering 2026, the question hanging over every single one of them is this: was last season who you really are, or was it just a chapter? Because the NFL doesn't give you forever to figure it out. The window is short. Terrifyingly short sometimes. You get a chance, and if you don't take it, someone else will. The league is always moving. Always rotating. Always finding the next guy. So which quarterbacks are walking into 2026 with real momentum? Which ones are walking in with real doubt? And which ones are walking into the biggest proving season of their lives? Those answers matter. Because they determine everything that comes after. The trades. The free agent decisions. The draft picks spent trying to build around a franchise cornerstone. When the quarterback situation is unclear, the entire organization operates in a fog. When it's clear, when you know you have your guy, everything opens up. The teams that have clarity at quarterback entering 2026 have an enormous advantage over the teams that don't. Remember that. It'll matter later. Now here's something wild to think about. How many Super Bowl winning quarterbacks of the last decade went into at least one of their seasons with serious questions about whether they could get it done? Not just questions from the media, real doubt. Real uncertainty from people inside the building. Almost all of them. That's not an accident. That's the nature of greatness. It rarely announces itself politely. It usually shows up right when everyone's decided it isn't coming. Which means somewhere on this 2026 roster landscape, there's a quarterback that most people have already started to write off, and that quarterback is about to remind everyone exactly what is made of. Don't look away. Coaching changes and the culture shock that follows. Let's talk about something that doesn't get enough credit. Coaching changes. Every single off-season, there's a wave of them. Head coaches fired. Offensive coordinators promoted. Defensive minds lured away from one system into another. And every single time, the same debate happens in every city where the change occurs. Is this an upgrade? Is this a disaster? And the honest answer, the one nobody wants to give but everyone should, is that nobody knows yet. Because coaching changes take time to evaluate. The impact of a new voice, a new system, a new set of expectations, a new culture, that doesn't show up in week 1. It shows up in week 8. In week 14. In the moments when a team is tested and has to decide who they really are. The 2026 season is going to feature several franchises going through that exact process. Teams that brought in new head coaches after disappointing seasons. Teams that changed coordinators because the offense stalled or the defense got shredded. Teams that made the decision, painful, expensive, sometimes controversial, that the person calling the shots wasn't the person who could take them where they wanted to go. And now those teams are entering uncharted territory. Think about what a coaching change really means for a football team. It's not just a new playbook. It's not just different drills. It's a complete reset of the culture. The expectations. The way players carry themselves from the moment they walk into the building. A new head coach changes everything. The music in the locker room. The tone of the meetings. The way practice is run. The standards that get enforced and the ones that get let go. Some players thrive in that environment. A fresh start, new energy, someone who believes in them in a different way, that can unlock something that was always there but never found the right conditions to grow. Other players wilt. They were comfortable in the old system. They'd figured out the old coach. They knew how to navigate the politics, the expectations, the hierarchy. And now all of that's gone. They have to start over. Prove themselves again. And some of them, some really talented players, never quite adjust. That's the double-edged reality of coaching changes. The same move that saves one player's career can derail another's. The same new voice that unlocks an offense can disrupt the rhythm of players who'd spent years in a different system. The franchises that navigate this well in 2026 are going to look brilliant by December. The ones that don't are going to spend another off-season asking themselves what went wrong. There's a pattern here. A historical one. Most teams that make dramatic coaching changes see a dip before the climb. Not always. But usually. The first year is rough. The growing pains are real. And then something clicks, or it doesn't. The teams entering 2026 with brand new coaches inherited a coin flip. Heads, they're building something special. Tails, they're back to square one in 12 months. Which way does it land? That's the question. And we're about to find out. The offensive revolution. Is your team keeping up? Football has always evolved. That's one of the things that makes it endlessly fascinating. The game you watched in 1985 looks nothing like the game you watched in 2005. The game you watched in 2005 looks nothing like what we're watching now. And what we're watching now, right here in 2026, is still evolving in real time. Offense has changed. Dramatically. The way teams score points today would have been considered almost impossible 30 years ago. The athleticism required. The speed of decision-making. The complexity of the schemes. The way defenses have been forced to adapt, and in some cases, completely reinvent themselves, just to stay competitive. But here's the thing that most casual fans miss. Not every team has kept up. There are franchises entering 2026 that are still running systems designed for a different era of football. They have the players. They have the talent. But the offensive philosophy is stuck. It's not moving with the game. And the gap between those teams and the ones at the cutting edge of modern offense is getting wider, not narrower. That gap shows up on the scoreboard. You've seen it. We all have. Teams with talented rosters that somehow can't score, can't find a rhythm, can't put together back-to-back productive drives. And the frustrating part, for fans, for coaches, for the players themselves, is that the talent clearly exists. The problem isn't ability. The problem is execution within a system that isn't designed to get the most out of that ability. Meanwhile, the teams at the forefront of the offensive revolution keep finding new ways to create advantages. New formations. New personnel groupings. New ways to manipulate a defense's alignment before the ball is even snapped. New ways to get their best players the ball in the spaces where they can do the most damage. The 2026 season is going to be a referendum on offensive philosophy. Teams that have invested in modern offensive minds, coaches who understand where the game is going, not just where it's been, are going to have an enormous structural advantage. And teams that haven't, they're going to find out the hard way. Here's a specific thread worth pulling on. The use of the run game has changed completely in the last 5 years. Not the act of running the ball, that's as old as the sport itself. But how teams use the run. When they use it. What they use it to set up. The relationship between the run and the pass has become more sophisticated than almost anyone could have predicted. Teams that understand this relationship, that use the run as a weapon within a larger offensive system rather than as a fallback or a default, are averaging significantly more points per game than teams that don't. Points win games. Games win seasons. Seasons build legacies. The offensive philosophy conversation sounds abstract, but it ends with a very concrete result. Championship rings or empty hands. The defensive identity question. Who can stop anyone? Defense. The forgotten half of football. Not really, but sometimes it feels that way. The headlines go to the quarterbacks. The highlight reels belong to the receivers. The off-season buzz surrounds the offensive weapons being added and the points that are going to be scored. But every single Super Bowl, every single one, is decided in part by which defense shows up when it matters most. Not which offense scored the most during the regular season. Which defense made the biggest stops when everything was on the line. And entering 2026, the defensive landscape of the NFL is genuinely fascinating. Because there are a handful of teams with truly elite defenses. Units that, on any given Sunday, can dismantle an offense completely. Can take the opposing team's best player and make him disappear for 3 hours. Can create turnovers that flip the momentum of a game before the offense even knows what happened. And then there are a lot of teams that aren't that. That are still figuring out their identity on defense. Still sorting out the personnel. Still trying to find a scheme that matches the players they have rather than forcing players into a scheme that doesn't fit. The gap between the elite defenses and the average ones in 2026 is significant. And that gap is going to determine playoff positioning for multiple teams. Let's talk about what makes a defense elite. Because it's not always what people think. Raw talent helps. Having the fastest cornerbacks, the most athletic linebackers, the biggest defensive linemen, those things matter. But they're not the whole picture. Because the greatest defenses in NFL history weren't just collections of talented players. They were units. Coordinated. Communicating. Reading the same keys. Trusting each other to do their jobs so that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The 2026 version of defensive dominance requires a very specific combination of things. You need pass rush, the ability to get to the quarterback without sending everyone you have after him, because if you're sending everyone, you're leaving someone open. You need secondary depth, because wide receivers have gotten so fast and so technically skilled that one great cornerback isn't enough anymore. And you need a defensive identity, a clear sense of who you are and how you play, that doesn't waver when things get hard. Teams that have that identity entering 2026. Genuinely dangerous. Teams still searching for it. Vulnerable in ways that playoff opponents will absolutely exploit. Chapter 5. The injury factor, the variable nobody can control. Nobody wants to talk about this. Everyone has to. Injuries are part of football. They always have been. The game is physical in ways that no other sport quite matches, and that physicality comes with a cost. Players get hurt. Sometimes the hurt is manageable. Sometimes it changes everything. But here's the part that makes injuries particularly interesting from a big-picture standpoint as we enter 2026. Several franchises are built around players who are coming off significant injuries. Players who had their 2025 seasons derailed, or ended, by something that shouldn't have happened but did. And now those players are back. In training camp. In pre-season. Telling everyone they feel great, they're 100%, they're ready. But are they really? That's not cynicism. It's an honest question that every front office has to ask. Because coming back from a serious injury in professional football is hard. The physical recovery is one thing. Your body can heal. The medical staff can clear you. The tests can show that everything is structurally sound. But the mental side, the willingness to plant your foot and take a hit in the spot where you got hurt last time, that takes longer. Sometimes much longer. Some players come back from serious injuries and look exactly like themselves from day one. Better, even, because the time away gave them perspective, gave their bodies a reset, gave them something to prove. Other players come back and you can see it. Not in the obvious ways. Not in the big mistakes. But in the subtle hesitation. The half second where the old instinct would have fired and now there's a pause. A calculation. A memory that shows up uninvited. The teams entering 2026 with major injury question marks are taking a calculated gamble every day. Their playoff ceiling depends on players who haven't been fully healthy in months. Their roster construction was built around talent that may or may not be there in the same form it was before. That uncertainty, that invisible variable hanging over entire seasons, is one of the most compelling storylines of 2026 before a single snap has been taken. And here's the dark truth underneath all of it. Every team is one injury away from a completely different season. Every single one. The team that looks like a Super Bowl contender in Week 1 can look like a bottom feeder by Week 6 if the wrong player goes down. And the team that looks overmatched can catch fire if the players they have stay healthy while everyone around them falls apart. The injury variable doesn't play favorites. It doesn't respect narrative. It doesn't care what the pre-season rankings said. It just happens. And how teams are built to survive it, the depth, the roster construction, the emergency plans, that's going to separate a lot of playoff hopefuls from playoff participants before this season is over. Chapter 6, the playoff picture, who's actually for real? Let's be honest about something. Every team in the NFL goes into the season believing they can make the playoffs. Every single one of them. The coaches say it. The players believe it. The fans hope for it. And by the time Week 4 rolls around, it becomes very obvious very quickly which teams were right to believe that and which ones were operating on hope rather than evidence. But the playoff picture entering 2026 is genuinely murky in a way it isn't every year. There are the clear contenders. The teams you look at and say, yes, obviously, they belong in this conversation. They have the quarterback. They have the roster. They have the coaching staff. They've done this before. Their identity is established. Then there are the clear pretenders. The teams with good marketing and bad depth. The teams that look dangerous on paper but fall apart when the games actually start to matter. You know these teams. You may love them. But somewhere in the back of your mind, you know. But this year, the middle ground is enormous. There are more teams in the genuine bubble zone, close enough to believe, flawed enough to doubt, than there have been in years. Teams that could absolutely make the playoffs if 3 or 4 things break right. Teams that could absolutely miss if those same things don't. Let's talk about some of the factors that will determine which way those bubble teams fall. Schedule matters more than most people give it credit for. Not in the obvious ways, not just they play easy opponents. It's about timing. When you play the hard games. Whether your stretch run comes against teams that are fighting for their playoff lives or teams that are already locked into their seeds and resting their starters. Whether your bye week comes at a moment when your team is healthy and hungry or when you're limping and desperate for rest. 2 teams with identical rosters can have wildly different seasons based purely on scheduling luck. Division record matters enormously. The path to the playoffs runs through your division rivals, and if you're in a division where 2 or 3 teams are genuinely good, you're playing hard games every few weeks with divisional seeding and wild card positioning on the line. If you're in a weaker division, you get 6 more manageable games built into your schedule. The teams entering 2026 in the toughest divisions are facing a harder road regardless of how talented they are. And the teams in weaker divisions have an opportunity to pile up wins that keep them in the conversation even through rough stretches. And then there's the September factor. How teams start matters psychologically in ways that the numbers alone don't capture. A team that goes 3-1 in September plays the next 8 weeks with confidence. A team that goes 1-3 plays those same weeks looking over their shoulder, questioning themselves, trying to get back to .500 before they can even think about the playoffs. Some teams are built to run slowly, to start rough and find their stride in November. Sometimes that works. The history of late-season runs making the playoffs is real. But it requires a roster deep enough to weather the early losses, a coaching staff confident enough to stay the course, and a fan base patient enough not to create external pressure that breaks the team's focus. In 2026, some bubble team is going to go 1-3 and everyone's going to write them off. Watch that team closely. Chapter 7, the running back renaissance and what it means. Something interesting has been happening in the NFL. The running back position, which spent the better part of a decade being devalued, underpaid, replaced by committees, and generally treated as interchangeable, is having a moment. Not because the thinking about running backs has fundamentally changed. The analytics haven't suddenly started loving running backs the way they love quarterbacks and pass rushers. But something else has happened. A recognition, quiet, grudging in some front offices, that certain running backs are genuinely special in ways that the position's overall statistics can't capture. The running backs entering 2026 who belong in the elite category aren't just ball carriers. They're weapons. They're threats in the passing game, which makes the defense cover them on every play, not just the obvious rundowns. They're blockers who can stay on the field in late-game passing situations. They're chess pieces that force defensive coordinators to make choices they don't want to make. And when you have that player, a truly complete running back, your offense operates differently. More space opens up for everything else. The quarterback gets cleaner pockets. The receivers get softer coverage. The entire offense gets easier. The teams entering 2026 with that elite running back have an asset that shows up in the win column in ways that don't always make the highlight reel but absolutely make the difference between close wins and tough losses. But here's the other side of this story. Running backs are still getting hurt at an alarming rate. The position is physically brutal in ways that are hard to overstate. Even the most talented running back in the world is one bad cut, one low tackle, one aggressive tackle from a season-ending injury. And teams that have built significant parts of their offensive identity around their featured back are extremely vulnerable when that player goes down. The 2026 running back landscape is a story of enormous upside and significant risk existing in exactly the same places at exactly the same time. That tension, between the value of having a great running back and the danger of depending on one, is going to play out across the league this season in fascinating ways. Chapter 8. The Wide Receiver Arms Race. If running backs are having a quiet renaissance, wide receivers are having an outright revolution. The position has never been more talented than it is right now. Never. The athleticism. The route running. The ability to create separation against elite cornerbacks in tight coverage on short routes, medium routes, deep routes, everything. The best wide receivers in the 2026 NFL are doing things on a football field that simply weren't possible 20 years ago because the athletes weren't built that way. And teams know it. Which is why the wide receiver market has exploded. Why teams are spending enormous resources, in draft capital, in salary cap space, in trade compensation, to secure elite receiving talent. Because in a passing league, having more weapons than the defense can cover is the closest thing to a guaranteed advantage that exists. But here's where it gets really interesting. Having a great wide receiver and maximizing a great wide receiver are two completely different things. You've seen it happen. A receiver goes to a new team, through free agency, through a trade, and suddenly looks like a completely different player. Either better than you remembered or somehow less than his reputation suggested. The difference isn't usually the receiver's talent. It's the system. The quarterback. The way the offense is designed to use him. Receivers thrive in systems that get them the ball in spaces where they can do damage. Some receivers are devastating on short, quick routes that let them use their speed and vision after the catch. Others are most dangerous on intermediate routes where they can win at the top with their technique. Others are pure deep threats, limited in some ways, but terrifying when they have the green grass of the open field in front of them. When the system matches the player. Magic. When it doesn't. Frustration. Wasted talent. Press conferences where the receiver insists he's happy and the coach insists they're using him correctly and everyone can see with their own eyes that it isn't working. The wide receiver situations entering 2026, the new partnerships, the reunions, the first-year connections between quarterbacks and receivers trying to build chemistry from scratch, are going to produce some of the most compelling individual performances of the season. And some of the most disappointing. Figuring out which is which before it happens. That's the game within the game. Chapter 9. The contract situations that could change everything. Let's talk money. Not because football is ultimately about money, it isn't. The players care about winning. The coaches care about winning. But money shapes everything. It determines which players stay and which ones go. It determines how teams are built and where their priorities lie. It creates friction and loyalty and resentment and motivation in ways that play out every single week on the field. And entering 2026, there are contract situations across the league that are genuinely ticking time bombs. Players who are in the final year of their deals. Players who feel they've outperformed their contracts and are playing for their next payday. Players who are underpaid relative to what the market is paying for their position and who know it and whose teammates know it and whose coaches know it. These situations create distraction. Not always. Some players are professionals in the truest sense. They lock in, they perform, they let the results speak for themselves and trust that the money will come. But others, and this is human, this is understandable, let the contract situation affect them. Play with one eye on protecting themselves from injury. Make decisions during games that are influenced by the knowledge that they need this season to go right for their bank account. The teams entering 2026 with major contract uncertainty at key positions are navigating something genuinely complicated. And the players at the center of those situations, they're about to have the most scrutinized seasons of their careers. Every game, every performance, every moment is going to be filtered through the lens of, is this player worth the money? Is this player going to get the extension? And if he does get paid, is this team going to be worse off because of the cap implications? These are the conversations that happen in every city with a team in this situation. They're happening right now. And they're going to get louder as the season unfolds. There's one more layer to this. Sometimes a player having a contract year is actually the best thing that could happen for a team. Because a motivated player, one who is playing for something beyond just the love of the game, can elevate his performance in ways that surprise everyone. Hunger is a powerful motivator. The fear of leaving money on the table is a powerful motivator. And there's a version of every contract year story where the player in question turns in the best season of his career and earns every single dollar that follows. The contract year performances you're going to see in 2026. Some of them are going to be legendary. Chapter 10. Special Teams and the Chaos Variable. We need to talk about something that casual fans ignore and coaching staffs never ignore. Special teams. The kicker who misses the field goal that would have sent his team to overtime. The punt returner who breaks one loose in the fourth quarter and completely changes the momentum of a game that was already decided. The blocked kick that gives an underdog team the only points they need to pull off an upset. Special teams is where chaos lives. Where unpredictable things happen. Where the players who don't make the highlight reel in any other context suddenly become the most important person on the field. The 2026 season is going to have at least 3, probably more, games where a special teams play is the single biggest factor in the final outcome. Not a supporting factor. The factor. The moment that wins or loses the game. And the teams that have invested in special teams, in the depth, in the quality of coverage units, in the kicker who can hit from 55 yards in a cold-weather stadium in December, those teams are going to steal wins that they had no business winning. And the teams that haven't, they're going to lose games that felt like they were theirs. Special teams doesn't get the narrative. Doesn't get the off-season buzz. But it absolutely gets the wins. Chapter 11. The weather and the stadiums. Why late season is different. Here's something worth thinking about as we look at the overall picture entering 2026. The NFL regular season spans 4.5 months. From September to January. And across those 4.5 months, the game being played in Week 15 is fundamentally different from the game being played in Week 1. Not because the rules change. Not because the players change. But because the environment changes. The weather changes. The stakes change. The mental and physical wear of a long season changes everything about how the game looks and feels. Teams that are built for September football, fast, finesse, dependent on conditions being perfect for their particular style, sometimes struggle to translate that into December football. Into cold stadiums. Into muddy fields. Into games where the wind makes precision passing nearly impossible and where the team that can run the ball effectively suddenly has an enormous advantage that didn't exist 4 months earlier. The contenders entering 2026 with a legitimate shot at going deep in the playoffs need to ask themselves an honest question. Are we built for January? Not for October. Not for the nationally televised games in warm stadiums in September. For January. For the cold. For the pressure. For the moment when everything you've built over the entire season gets tested in a single elimination game where there are no second chances. The teams that can say yes to that question with real conviction, those are the teams that should genuinely scare you. Chapter 12. The Super Bowl prediction nobody wants to make. All right. We've talked about quarterbacks and coaches. About offenses and defenses. About contracts and injuries and special teams and weather. About the questions that don't have answers yet and the stories that are still being written. Now let's get to the part everyone actually wants. Who's going to be there in February? Here's the honest version of this conversation. Making Super Bowl predictions before the season starts is mostly a fool's errand. The variables are too many. The injuries are too unpredictable. The surprise teams, the ones nobody saw coming, are too real to ignore. Every single year, a team makes a run that nobody had on their radar in August. Every single year. But there are patterns. There are structural advantages that repeat. There are characteristics that Super Bowl teams share almost universally. And when you look at the 2026 landscape through those characteristics, some things become clearer. Super Bowl teams almost always have one thing in common above everything else. They're built to peak in January. Not to start hot in September. Not to dominate a weak schedule. Not to put up gaudy offensive numbers in ideal conditions. They're built to play their best football when the margin for error is zero. When one mistake can end the season. When the other team is equally desperate and equally talented and the outcome genuinely could go either way. The teams entering 2026 that fit that profile? They're out there. You know some of them already. A couple of them are going to surprise you. And one of them, one single team, is going to be standing in the confetti in February, holding the trophy, listening to the celebration, and knowing that everything they built and every question they answered along the way was worth it. That moment is coming. The journey to it starts now. Final chapter. What the 2026 season is really about. Let's zoom out one more time. Because underneath all of it, the quarterback questions, the coaching changes, the contract dramas, the defensive identity crises, the offensive revolutions, underneath all of it, the 2026 NFL season is about something bigger. It's about where the game is going. Every season is a chapter in a longer story. The story of professional football and how it evolves. How the players get faster and more skilled. How the strategies get more sophisticated. How the conversation around the game changes. The way we talk about player safety, about how the game is analyzed, about what winning looks like and what it costs. The 2026 season is going to leave a mark. Not just because of the champion that gets crowned, though that matters. But because of the things that happen along the way. The moments that shift conversations. The performances that redefine positions. The teams that prove something, about their city, about their organization, about what's possible when you get the right people in the right building believing in the same thing. Football at its best is a mirror. It reflects back the things we care about. Perseverance. Teamwork. The ability to absorb failure and come back. The refusal to accept limitations that everyone else has decided are permanent. The belief that the game isn't over until it's actually over. And the 2026 season is going to give us all of that. Multiple times. In multiple cities. In moments that you'll still be talking about years from now. So here's where we leave it. The biggest questions entering the 2026 NFL season don't have answers yet. That's the whole point. That's what makes football genuinely, almost unbearably compelling. The not knowing. The possibility. The way everything can change in a single quarter, a single play, a single moment of brilliance or disaster. The quarterbacks are going to surprise us. The defenses are going to do things we didn't expect. The teams we counted out are going to make us remember why we never really should have. And the teams we counted on are going to, at some point, remind us that nothing in this league is guaranteed. The 2026 NFL season is going to be everything. It's going to be heartbreaking and exhilarating and confusing and clarifying all at once. And it starts right now. Don't miss a single second of it.